Lizzie Weber joining us from the pristine beaches of what looks like Hawaii, maybe.
Or Santa Barbara or
Yeah,
LA, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
Hawaii is the best.
Malibu, yeah.
Yeah.
Indonesia. For those listening on the podcast and not watching the YouTube video, Lizzie's got a very nice virtual background going on where it looks like she's on the beach. But thanks for joining us. Looking forward to talking about your awesome new music. But before we do, why don't you take us back and let us know how you got into music to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm so
Sure.
excited to be here today. So I would say a late bloomer with music. I wasn't sort of like as far as pursuing music professionally, it wasn't a childhood dream necessarily. I took piano lessons starting at 12 and started messing around with compositions a little bit in my teenage years. I remember my piano teacher would come over and we would be learning Bach and Tchaikovsky and Beethoven, and I would put, like Vanessa Carlton on the piano
Uh-huh.
stand and be like, "Can we learn some of these pieces?"
Yeah.
Because that was around. It was around that age that I
Yeah.
I really was in love with the sort of badass females of the '90s, like Jewel and Fiona
Yeah.
Apple and Sarah McLachlan and Vanessa Carlton.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was when I started realizing I really had an affection for singer-songwriter music and folk music. So much so that I wanted to learn their pieces, but never really thought so much about composing my own. I liked to sing, but I didn't grow up in a musical family per se. My brother is a musician. But it was not, my parents are in medicine, so it wasn't like necessarily fostered, but
Mm-hmm.
but it was appreciated.
Yeah.
So as I got older, I took the Esteban guitar to college. My dad had ordered it off of an infomercial. I don't
I
know if you
remember
ever
that
remember seeing
guitar.
those. He just, with his beautiful long fingernails, and he was like, "Buy my guitar," and I
Yeah.
was like, my dad was like, "Hell yeah, I'm gonna buy that guitar." And so he
uh,
he purchased it from the
mm-hmm.
infomercial, and I took it with me to college, and I started to teach myself how to play guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just started composing from there on a more serious level, and I started pairing lyrics with it and just sort of thinking this is a hobby. I was
Mm-hmm.
actually in theater. I was pursuing acting.
Mm-hmm.
I moved to LA when I was 20
Mm-hmm.
and was pursuing it full time out there, while just sort of making music on the side for fun when I wasn't getting auditions, and I was working a nanny job and
Mm-hmm.
a job as the front desk admin person at a yoga studio in Studio City. Um, and so yeah, I guess it's a longer answer to your question, but
No,
that's
we
kind of
got a whole interview.
how it began,
Yeah.
and it was funny because when I was working at that yoga studio, and I wasn't, I had trouble getting an agent when I was in LA, and I was starting to feel like I was just hitting a wall, and I didn't know how much I wanted to pursue it anymore because it's hard, man. It's hard out there, especially when you're constantly being like, well, I already have a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl that's 20, so I can't take you on, and you're just taken at face value.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that started as a young woman to really sort of eat away at me, not in a good way. I was like, I don't know how much I like not having control over when I can and cannot be creative.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started receiving invitations from the yoga studio instructors to play a song at the end of classes during Shavasana, which is the end of class pose when you're just laying on your mat.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just go and everybody would be laying down and I would play one of my originals and then go back to the desk where people would come out and put their shoes on.
Mm-hmm.
Weird things, maybe not weird, but cool things started happening where, people would start putting their business cards on the desk. And one was like, the vice president of music production at Disney, or like,
Nice.
I'm Bob Dylan's entertainment lawyer, or somebody in music sync and licensing that started expressing. And I was like, they were like, so do you have, like, are you, I'm like, this is just fun, this in my
Yeah.
mind, I was 21 at the time. And I was like, this is really just fun stuff for me. I'm not thinking about pursuing it seriously, but those little, maybe in that moment of time when I had gone through so much rejection, started to receive a little bit of validation for something that I was making on my own, something that I was creating on my own,
Hmm.
sort of following my heart with that, it just sort of opened the door and I just went with it. I just sort of was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to get into the studio and I'm going to cut a record. And that's what I did. So that began my journey.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and cool way to kind of start getting people's attention. Because
It is.
one, you got a captive audience.
Right.
Two,
Exactly.
two, they're very like zen after
Yes.
a good yoga session. So all
Yeah.
these endorphins are going
Endorphins.
through
Yeah.
their body, and they're just like, oh, what is this music? It's just like, and it's live, so it's just like takes on this whole other thing.
Yes.
So I think that was a really fortunate slash smart way of kind of doing it, and obviously it worked because you were getting people dropping their business cards in front of you and saying there was something so special about that,
Yeah.
besides the music being great. I mean, that felt
Right.
so good. What was that? Forget that it was the yoga class but
Yeah.
contributing maybe a little bit to it. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so you start meeting the right people, and then you write this album, and so what was the plan? Did you were you connected with the right people at that point who were going to help you, at least in some ways?
So it was interesting because it was around that time, shortly after that, I ended up moving back to St. Louis, which is where I'm from and where I am now. Um, and I decided to finish my degree in journalism at
Hmm.
WashU and then at the same time make that record. So I had those contacts and I ended up spending about a year in the studio just sort of writing and recording as I went. I, for all intents and purposes, like I didn't know what I was doing. I had no experience producing. I just basically had experience putting, the structure of a song together, knowing how to write a song and bringing it into the studio and being like, I was truly getting my feet wet as I was making that record. And so once I finished it, I sent it out to a couple of those people that had reached out to me, the year and 18 months or 2 years prior with those business cards. And
Mm,
and to what it was more like, "Hey, this is great. Thanks for sharing. I'll see what I can do." But as you know,
right.
it's like it's no, sometimes you get that really lucky introduction and other times it turned out to be more of just sort of the catapult for going out on my own and just
Mm,
having to really start to get my hands dirty and just understand that the music business is no place for the faint of heart.
right.
Because I certainly, those contacts were so receptive and kind, but it was actually the St. Louis music scene that lifted me up when I made that record.
Mm,
And I started, which is so important when you're starting out making music, to really be a part of your community, to show up at open mics and to support your other artists in your community. And I remember I was interning at KDHX, which is the independent radio station here at the time that I released the album. It was like January of 2014, and 11 magazine, which was an indie music publication, had like given me this huge centerfold long, feature piece on my record, and I was like so surprised and like, well, I don't know. But KDHX was like, conflict of interest. We can't play your record because you're working here,
ugh.
interviewing musicians.
You're like, why do you
And
think I'm working here? That was the game plan all
oh
along.
gosh, no, I actually loved, that was my intention. I was like, I'll make this record, but I love to write and I want to be a music journalist. I was
Hmm.
reviewing live shows, I was interviewing musicians, and I was doing, feature pieces, and I loved doing it.
Hmm.
But I loved making music more, so I just ended up going down that path. But when I sort of had that positive reception to that first record, which I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing,
Hmm.
like I'm just going to put this record together, hope it turns out well. But that sort of positive reception in the local press here and in my community was really what opened up more doors for opportunity. And I ended up making a music video for that record for Falling Like Fools that screened at international film festivals around the world, and like opened other doors. So it was just like, and I collaborated with a director in LA named Carla Dowden, who is absolutely incredible. And we made the video with like a skeleton crew in LA, and she just knocked it out of the park, and it got all this positive reception too. And so a couple things happened where it just, I got maybe a little bit lucky, but it was also just all that hard work sort of paying off. And then I was like, okay, like, yeah, you got your degree. That was great. But let's, I don't know, let's keep riding this wave, and let's keep writing music, and just see what happens. And so that first record and that positive local reception that I got was really what gave me the confidence to continue. And I was loving it so much. It truly became, it was less of a scary thing of like, I don't know when when it came to acting, I don't know when I'm going to get that next job. I don't know when I'm going to get that representation. I don't know when I'm going to be able to, quit this nanny job or this, desk job at the yoga studio. It sort of became this place of comfort of, I can go and I can write. And as many musicians feel it, a place of therapy and catharsis. And it just sort of made me feel complete, in a big way. And so that's, in a nutshell, how it began.
Yeah, it's true that, I mean, I guess there's exceptions to this now, but it is easier, at least traditionally, I feel, for musicians to just kind of go. It's like, I'm going to make some music. Whether
Yes,
whether or not I got booked for a gig or something, I'm going to make music and I can put out music. Whereas, you know, actors are looking to get booked for something to be an actor in.
exactly.
I said there's exceptions to the rule now because we have social media, so you can create a series of
Right.
short little exhibitions of your talent.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, definitely in a more traditional sense, as an artist, is especially with our technology today, you can do so much just by yourself, with or without
Exactly.
anybody else to have the encouragement of. But yeah, so I mean, really, a year and a half or whatever it is a long time, especially in Los Angeles or New York or any entertainment industry, to call someone up and be like, hey, remember after that yoga class you said I was really good, and here's my stuff. But it sounds like that
Exactly.
gave you kind of maybe more of a confidence boost, and more of a, just like, you're going the right
Yes.
direction, do this. And then like you
Yeah.
said, you found a more immediate audience and community, in your hometown, where you actually went back to.
Exactly. And especially, at that age, and like I said, I was starting out maybe sort of later. It wasn't like I had a guitar in my hand at 7, or like
Hmm.
I was actively like, this is my lifelong dream. It was sort of like one day at a time. And that those events are definitely what sort of, like you said, gave me that confidence to be like, okay, maybe I should go into a studio and see what happens. Whereas maybe before I would have just stayed in LA. I don't know, kept it as a hobby perhaps, because like I said, it's tough to, at that age, for anybody who's going out, and whether or not it's acting or music or any element of the entertainment industry, it's cutthroat, and it is hard. It is so hard. And so I commend anybody who takes a step in either direction on either of those paths in any capacity. And it takes a lot of resilience. And so maybe that's what those experiences gave me, was just having that resilience a little bit to say, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to make some stuff, and
Yeah.
I'm going to see what happens. And I hope that it resonates with people. But all I know is that even though these people are lying on a mat and they're not looking at me, and they're, yes, high on endorphins, I'm gonna believe that this music moved them to their bones, and
Mhm.
I'm gonna keep doing it. So
Well, obviously, even without the benefit of having some post yoga endorphins,
Yeah.
you were able to get some really cool people's attention. You went on to work with Grammy Award winning producer Sheldon Gomberg, who's worked
Yeah.
with Ben Harper and Ryan Adams. Huge stuff. And then Marketa Glova, who did the movie Once and also did the Swell season. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, after I made that record, and speaking of that music video, my sort of feels like, I guess, more very lucky chance meeting with Marquetta. She was getting ready to go on tour for her second solo album, Muna, in 2014, and this was for anybody out there who maybe isn't familiar with the movie Once. She and Glenn Hansard were in a band called the Swell Season that formed after they won an Oscar for their song Falling Slowly. I think it was like in 2009. It's a little Irish indie film that's just a modern day musical that's so awesome. And I watched it when I was like 19 years old. And that was around the time when I started to write music. And I went and saw them live at the Chicago Theater in the nosebleeds and the Hollywood Bowl in the nosebleeds. And so I was definitely a super fan, and I think I really connected to the two of them and their writing their music because they were, a part of, I guess, the singer songwriter genre of just writing that authentic, vulnerable, honest, raw, minimally produced music, which really again resonated with me, similar to those sort of raw um, ladies from the 90s who just left those records so real. I guess there's no other word I can describe it, right? We
Yeah.
listen to a lot of music that's really produced these days,
Yeah.
and that's cool.
Mhm.
But for me personally, I was so attracted to that sound from such a young age, and I stayed attracted to it. That's really, those are the kind of musicians that really catch my attention and my ear. And so, like I said, I was a super fan. Um, and when I saw that Mar was going on tour, I sent her a Facebook message. And I had like tried reaching out to her manager, tried reaching out to her agent and stuff like that. And as you know, those walls can sort of be difficult to penetrate sometimes. And this is
Mhm.
cool for any independent artist out there who's listening. Do not be afraid to reach out, because that's in the end of the day, that's all this is we're doing, right? We're making music. We want to connect with people, and sometimes you'll be met with no response, sometimes you'll be met with a response, in which case, for this instance, I sent Marquetta a message on Facebook and just sent her my music video and said, hey, I'm a super, big fan of yours. I would love to be your tour support if you have yet to fill the spot. And, please let me know if that would be interested to you. And I remember I was like, oh, I shouldn't have sent that message. What was I thinking?
Uh-huh.
But, like you press
Mm.
send and then you're just like, just
Yeah.
kidding. Um, so she responded though, and just was so gracious and so kind. And I remember I like opened my phone, it was like 6 o'clock in the morning, and I saw that she had sent me a message, and my heart skipped a beat.
Mhm.
I just it's like one of your musical heroes just responding to you, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, this is so wonderful. And she was so kind, and I was so humbled by her response, and so she was so complimentary. And she said, I do have tour support, for both the European and US states. But however, I would love if you would sit in with, pick any show on the US tour. And I'd love to have you come and play one of your songs in my set and sit in with us. And I just
Cool.
was like, oh, absolutely, I will be there. I
Yeah.
was so excited.
Yeah.
And so, I ended up, they weren't touring through St. Louis, which is where I was at the time. I had a bunch of good friends. I was planning to go to LA in fall of 2014 anyway, which is when she was going to be rolling through LA and playing the Hotel Cafe. And so
Mm.
that's where I ended up going and playing with them. And I showed up during their sound check, and and her whole band just picked up the song in about one 0.5 run throughs.
Wow.
They just were so, and I was so nervous but excited. I was like, oh my gosh, that's Rob Botchnick from the Frames, and that's the Irish band that Glenn Hansard started in before they made the movie once. And he's playing on my song, and Marquetta is here, and she's so sweet, and this is so wonderful. And it was amazing. I played one of the songs from my record, and they sat in, and from there, Marquetta and I stayed in touch via email. And a few years later, when I was working on an EP, I had a song called River that I was working on that needed a soprano harmony. And I reached out to her again, and she had just finished building a studio in her home in Reykjavik, Iceland. And she responded and said, yes, she would sing on the track. And I just was like, again, just so grateful. And so that's when I ended up going there in 2018. It was like March of 2018, and she sang and produced. Actually, it was what ended up being released was a double single, which is River and Free Floating. River was sort of already written and hashed out mostly before I went there to work with her on that track, but Free Floating was something that we sort of concocted while I was there. I had the basic structure of the song, but she really helped me produce it, both of those songs, and bring them to life in a way that I didn't anticipate. So it was kind of a crazy situation that just escalated in a way that was so wonderful, because I got to work and collaborate with one of my mentors and heroes, and it just, still talking about it now feels surreal. So it's a long
Yeah,
answer to your question, Sean.
no, that's an awesome story. Uh, you must have, my thought is that you must have left an impression at the Hotel Cafe show, which for listeners outside of Los Angeles is a popular kind of smaller venue for these types of shows, like singer songwriter, but they do other shows there too, but it's I think it's ideal for those types of shows.
Absolutely.
And it's a great venue. But you must have left an impression, because she probably liked you, obviously said, no, come on, play a show. But to actually continue the relationship, did you feel, was there an energy in the room when you played that day that where you're like, this is going well, or the audience is receiving this, or did you get a feeling like it was going pretty well, or did you not really get a sense until afterwards, like, hey, I must have done a good job, because we're still in touch?
It's a good question. I think for me, mostly, that show, I remember just having so much fun, and it was kind of like one of those things. I'm sure a lot of people who perform in situations like that, your adrenaline is so high, you just feel like you blacked out. You just went up there and you blacked out.
Uh-huh.
Um, in a good way. But it was like it was, we played. It was the main stage, so it felt like an intimate crowd,
Mhm.
and her whole band played, and I just remember feeling really connected. We kind of had some time to hang out before the show, and really, aside from as great as it was to be able to sit in and have that experience playing with her and her band, and it was really the connection off stage that I feel like was probably an equally lasting impact, because if you
Sure.
don't connect on a personal level, then it's cool to connect on a musical level. That's great, but it's great when you have both of those elements, sort of happening, and you really actually have a genuine connection with somebody. And that's where, I felt like in my heart of hearts, I knew that we would, sort of find our way maybe back into a collaborative situation in one way or another, whether it was maybe hopefully that tour down the road, or another, sort of miraculous or maybe fated moment of working together in her studio. So, that's a great question, but I think it was probably both. It was, it was a great, fun performance. I think I played Lighthouse, which is the one of the maybe the third track on my debut, and then, but we just were hanging out. She had her daughter with her, and we were just kind of like all hanging out in the green room a little bit, and we just had a great time. So I think that definitely opened the door for staying in touch. And she was, we continued to just sort of write each other on occasion over the years. She was supporting Damien Rice on a string of West Coast shows in like 2015, and she was like, if you're in Seattle, come, I'll put you on the guest list. And we just kind of continued to just stay in touch. She was just, again, for somebody, she's quite successful, and she was so warm and humble, and I feel so lucky that I sort of got to have those experiences with her. And it just goes to show you, you can have any amount of success in this world. You can win an Oscar or a Grammy or whatever, but ultimately, those lasting connections and those lasting impressions are based on, those values and who you are as a person. And I feel like that's really where we connected a lot, and that's what facilitated a successful collaboration too. And by successful, I mean meaningful. And
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's an awesome story about, you said, hey, reach out to people sometimes, because you could reach out to a hero and say, hey, can I open for you? And she might say, no, but why don't we do some songs together? Like,
Yes,
like,
exactly.
even better,
Exactly.
and now that you guys have done some stuff together, who knows, maybe you will tour together at some point.
Sure.
But so awesome story. Tell us a little bit about your new music that you've released this year. You've released a couple new singles. How does it feel? And Lay Down Your Love.
Yes. Yeah. So I, like so many musicians at the, early stages of the pandemic, was a little panicked.
Mhm.
And by a little, I mean very.
Mhm.
Maybe not so much very. I was just more like, you know, like I said at the beginning when we were chatting, about community. And when you lose that as a musician, it's one thing maybe when you can work from home and you have Zoom meetings all day, but like when you're a musician and you're creating, it's all about being with your people and collaborating in person and playing live shows and, connecting with strangers in the audience. And so I was a little bit, I was kind of feeling like, okay, around when April came around, I was like, okay, it looks like this is going to be something that's really going to affect the remainder of the year in a big way. And so, speaking of Marquetta, I had actually had a plane ticket to Iceland in May to make my next record with her.
Mm.
She and her husband Mio, who was the engineer for River and Free Floating, who the two of them are like an absolute dream team. They're both wickedly talented together, and so they were the two that I was going to bring my next full length project to. And so that quickly fell through, when COVID came around, and I knew that would just need to be tabled for a little while.
Mhm.
And with that in mind, I decided to take a few new songs that I had written during isolation in the early sort of weeks of the shutdown, and produce a 3-song EP. And what came out of that was this EP, How Does It Feel? And I've released the first 2 singles, the title track, How Does It Feel? And Lay Down Your Love. And it was kind of, again, I wasn't sure how it was going to go because we did everything remotely. The only thing that we did, I recorded my guitar and vocals in the studio. And we also recorded the rhythm section, bass and drums safely in studio. This was sort of when people had figured out, okay, if we wear masks and keep people isolated, we can do this safely.
Mhm.
But everything else was done remotely. And I just thought, okay, this is a nice way for me to sort of pour what I'm feeling right now, which is loneliness, like everybody had been going through. And,
Right.
just this is a struggle for every single person in the world. And so I just took these songs that sort of came out in a very quick way. I didn't overthink it. I just took them to studio. I gave the musicians some demos, asked for them to send me some of their ideas remotely from their home studios. That's what we did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's as far as producing it, from afar. It was challenge and maybe a little bit more challenging because we didn't get that initial let's get together as a band and play through these and see what happens, which is a lot of the time how I like to sort of formulate. And I'm very particular about um, instrumentation and production.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really like to be involved in that. And I'm on the pickier side.
Yeah.
So I was like, how is this going to work?
Right.
But I also had total faith in my collaborators, as I had worked with each of them before, and they all helped me bring these songs to life in a way that I'm really proud of. And I think it was also a great thing for us to all sort of be working a little bit. I think it was around May and June that we were doing the actual recording. And so we had already been in sort of a lockdown for like 8 weeks. And then living in the Pacific Northwest, I was still in the Northwest at this time. And you're just like, I haven't seen the sun in I don't know how many days.
Yeah.
And I need some good distraction here. So yeah, we ended up, ending up with these 3 songs and all of the majority of the instrumentation, cello, all my strings recorded remotely in their separate studios. I
Wow.
had a guest pianist on Blue Wave Bloom who is absolutely wonderful. His name's Aaron Guest, and he tracked piano at a friend's studio, and so yeah, it just sort of was. It really feels like out of everything that I've put out so far, maybe the most spontaneous work. It was sort of one of those things that I was just like, don't think about this, just think about the message of the songs, which, for the title track, How Does It Feel? I think that if there's one thing that we can take away from this time is that we can all stand to be a little bit more vulnerable with one another and stand to really let our walls down. And, I, for one, was struggling big time. This is unprecedented. This is, I'm an extrovert. I love connection,
Right.
touch,
Mm-hmm.
hugging my people,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. This is against our nature. And
Totally.
so these songs were really written in the face of that, and for How Does It Feel? I thought it sort of encompassed the whole sort of emotive theme of the EP, which is it's okay to lean into one another for strength right now. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay to not, I know it's like cliche, whatever, who cares? Right? It's okay to not be okay,
Yep.
and I feel like I got to that place with my friends too, where it would be like we would see each other in a socially distanced setting,
Mm.
outside or whatever. And I would be like, hey, like, how are you, dude? You doing all right? And you're like, dude, I'm fucking not okay.
Yeah. No.
Like it was just like,
Yep.
like, I don't
Uh-huh.
know about you, man, but I'm having a hard time.
Uh-huh.
And you're like, yeah, I'm having a hard time too. It's like, and so I felt like these songs were sort of just the crux of that emotion of, hey, man, I'm like struggling and we're not alone in this, but also sort of that, lay down your love is more that sort of beacon of light that you can just kind of, whatever that message is, you get up and tell yourself, every day when you're just craving that change of scenery, or especially if you're living alone right now, which I think is just so difficult. I'm lucky that I have my husband, but I can only imagine for those who are living alone, like, just how much strength it takes to get out of bed sometimes and say like, okay, it's going to be me, myself, and I today, but we're going to do this. Whatever mantra you need to tell yourself that we're going to get through this. I'm going to reach out when I need to reach out. And that's what I'm going to do to get through this. And
Yeah.
so that was these songs were truly, all born from these emotions that were circulating in me, and as I noticed circulating in my friends, that it was very much something that I just felt like, okay, you know what? I know you just wrote these songs. Typically I like to sit on songs for like 4 years.
Yeah.
Or maybe not 4 years, but a long
Yeah.
time. I
Yeah.
like to take my time with
Let
my
them marinate a little
compositions.
bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And this was definitely more of like a, let's just let these out, put these out, and hope that they bring some peace of mind and some solace maybe to those who need it.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for the full thing to be out in
Yeah.
January.
Yeah. So the rest of the EP will come out in January. Is that do you know, mid-January, late January?
It's January 22nd.
Okay. Nice.
Yes.
All
So
right.
that'll be, so right now we've got, 2 singles out, and then the third and final track will be out with the full EP on the 22nd. So that'll be Blue Wave Bloom that y'all haven't heard yet.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean though. I've had those conversations like, wow, must be tough for those living alone, you know.
yes,
I don't even like being, I've before I lived with my fiance, I always liked having a roommate at least, just cuz
exactly.
I felt like I would get too alone or too much in my own head or something like that if I lived by
Yes,
myself. And so but even then I do like being alone sometimes, but I always like having that. I am an extrovert too, I think, and so I like my alone time, but also like being very on at certain times with other people. You know what I mean?
absolutely,
And
exactly.
and this, yeah, just what we're going through right now. It's just so strange because we're told and for our safety and for our health to all these things that go totally against what we've been told our entire lives are the best things you could do for you and others. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Hugs, visits, warmth, all
exactly.
of that.
Yes,
Being productive, going out, get out of the house, go do stuff,
exactly. Yes,
So it's such a strange time, but
it is.
hopefully we're at the tail end of it,
I think we
fingers
are.
crossed. Yeah, we'll see.
Hmm.
But awesome story, Lizzie. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Yeah.
We like to end the interview by asking if you had one piece of advice for aspiring artists, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great, great question. Maybe that's, don't doubt yourself. Don't doubt yourself. I think that it's so easy when you are an artist and you're making something for people to dissect, or, you know, something that you hope receives, whatever praise or whatever. Do it for you. Do it for you more than anything. If this is, I feel like that's maybe some of the best advice that I could give myself too, is like, there's always that, especially when if you're independent or whatever, you don't have a team that's sort of pushing, doing all that hard work on your side. If you're just starting out and you're just, putting yourself out there and you're writing work that you're like, hey, this is good. Just believe that, don't doubt yourself. And maybe the next, and maybe the most important piece of advice that I was given when I was 20. And it's funny, actually, maybe I could end with this tiny little story, Sean, because it's a good
Yeah,
one.
please do.
I was babysitting for the manager of the Foo Fighters when I was living in LA,
Oh, cool.
and really, really nice guy. And
Mhm.
his sister is friends with my dad. So when I was out there looking for work, yeah,
Mhm.
that's how that connection
Right,
happened.
right.
And I remember, before I started babysitting his daughter for a little while, I had, I got put in touch with him, and I sent him like a couple of demos that I had made in like
Mhm.
a basement. It was maybe
Mm.
some of my first ever
Uh-huh.
songs that I had written, and I was so
Uh-huh.
excited. I was like, oh my gosh, what is he? I'm going to send him these demos. We're going to have lunch.
Gonna
And
open for the
once he
Foo
get,
Fighters.
Dave Grohl is going to call me tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
No, but he said, he looked at me and said, play live shows, play
Mhm.
shows. And I know that that is really hard right now given what we're going through, but this won't be forever. And
Mhm.
so that would be my other piece of advice that I think is really important, because where I feel like I finally began to understand who I was as an artist was by trying things out on stage, and just making sure I took every opportunity. Obviously, don't take an opportunity that you feel like, oh, hey, free promo, but we're not going to pay you.
Mhm.
Take opportunities
Mhm.
that you feel
It's
like,
good for exposure.
yeah, thanks, dude. I have to eat.
Mhm.
Um, anyway, so that piece of advice I felt like was also really strong for me because I was like, I was so disappointed because, you know, he wasn't impressed with the demos.
Mhm.
But of course he was, you know, like they were thinking back on, I know what those demos sound like. And I'm like, God.
Right.
But, you know,
So
but
he
I
told
was
you
just,
that after, so he listened and then told you that.
he listened, yeah, we had
Mm.
lunch and, you know, and I said, what do you think? You know, because I'm really, this was around the time that I was starting to, you know, get those business cards at the show.
Mhm.
And I was like, you know, just curious, like,
Yeah.
what do you think? You know, and he
Mhm.
was like, I think you should play some live shows.
Mhm.
You know, like, I think, you know, you're just starting out. I think you should play some live shows. And so for the next, you know, decade, I played my ass off. You know, I hundreds and hundreds of shows and solo shows, live band shows. And I think that that is truly where you get your confidence too, you know, is it's just like, okay, where do I fit in this artistic world of mine?
Yeah.
And so I think that that too is really sound advice. And and uh and I'm very appreciative of the, you know, he was like, your demos were okay.
Yeah.
And I was like, thank you
Uh-huh.
so much.
Yeah.
They're okay.
Well,
But you know,
it's
yeah.
funny you mentioned that he was the manager of the Foo Fighters because
Yeah.
they may have had this discussion. But I've heard Dave Grohl give the exact same advice
Yeah.
in an interview, or I think it
I'm
was an
sure.
interview,
Yeah.
and he said just play live. He's like, you know,
Yes.
someone if you play live enough, you know, you're gonna get good,
Yep.
and someone is going to see you.
Bringing it backward.